We visit the world of pastoral Israel, a realm of peace and natural pleasures enjoyed by a privileged few in 18th century France and Britain. Two dramatic explosions were to sweep this world away, the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, and of course painting would change along with everything else. But we can revisit this lost world of aristocratic ease because it is preserved in French painting and in British, the first time our art reaches major status. The British contribution to the story happened just when the new squirearchy was finding its feet. Country gentlemen needed paintings to show off their status, to show their impossibly elegant selves and their possessions. If you were proud of your wife, send for Joshua Reynolds, first president of the brand new Royal Academy of Art.
Sir Joshua Reynolds was an influential 18th century English painter, specializing in portraits and promoting the grand style in painting which depended on idealization of the imperfect. He was one of the founders and first president of the Royal Academy. King George III appreciated his merits and knighted him in 1768. Reynolds was born in Plympton, Devon, on 16 July 1723. As one of 10, maybe 11 children, and the son of the village schoolmaster, Reynolds was restricted to a formal education provided by his father. He exhibited a natural curiosity and as a boy came under the influence of the Harish Mudge, whose Platonistic philosophy stayed with him all his life. Reynolds was particularly skilled at choosing poses and actions which suggested a sitter's character and which also created a strong composition. Shown here in his mid-30s wearing the Highland dress on the 3rd Regiment of Foot Guards. No payment for his portrait is recorded and it wasn't collected from the Reynolds student. Lord Dunmore later went to America and became Governor of New York and then Governor of Virginia. He was unpopular with the colonists and was constantly engaged in disputes. By the time the War of Independence was underway, he had been driven away. Here, three sisters, the daughters of the second Earl Waldegrave, are shown collaboratively working on a piece of needlework. The joint activity links the girls together. On the left, the eldest, Lady Charlotte, holds a skein of silk, which the middle sister, Lady Elizabeth, winds onto a card. On the right, the youngest, Lady Anna, works a tambour frame, using a hook to make lace on a taut net.
Or if your prize bloodstock mare was the apple of your eye, then who better than George Stubbs?
Stubbs was born in Liverpool, the son of currier and leather merchant. George Stubbs appears to have had a natural talent for portraiture and had only a little formal instruction from the local artist Hamlet Winstanley. His early career as a provincial portrait painter took him to the town of Leeds, Wigan, York and Hull. He had, however, a great scientific curiosity, typical of many other Renaissance masters, and like Leonardo, throughout his life made extensive studies of both human and animal anatomy. Stubbs worked at his father's trade until he was 15 or 16, and after his father's death in 1741 was briefly apprenticed to a Lancashire painter and engraver named Hamlet Winstanley. He soon left as he objected to the work of copying to which he was set. Thereafter, as an artist, he was self-taught. In the 1740s, he worked as a portrait painter in the north of England, and from about 1745 to 1741 he studied human anatomy at the York Country Hospital. He had had a passion for anatomy from his childhood, and one of his earliest surviving works is a set of illustrations for a textbook of midwifery, which was published in 1751. In 1756 he rented a farmhouse in the village of Hawkstow, Lincolnshire, and spent 18 months dissecting horses, assisted by his common-law wife, Mary Spencer. He moved to London in about 1759, and in 1766 published The Anatomy of the Horse. The original drawings are now in the collection of the Royal Academy.
By the mid-1700s, George Stubbs replaced John Wooton as the foremost horse painter. Stubbs had worked closely with physicians and illustrated a text on midwifery. From this work, he learned a layer-by-layer dissection method that allowed him to create drawings with details not seen before. Over a period of 2 years, he patiently dissected horses in a lonely farmhouse in Lincolnshire. Stubbs published the finished drawings in The Anatomy of the Horse. This detailed knowledge of the horse's anatomy put the artist's considerable talents in much demand.
Stubbs also painted more exotic animals, including lions, tigers, giraffes, monkeys and rhinoceros, which he was able to observe in private menageries.
Stubbs was far more interested in the beauty of horses than in the vanity of his human patrons. But all these paintings immortalized a quintessential Englishness. Beyond the houses, gardens and paddocks lay that special joy, the countryside. What could be more English? The landed gentry drew their wealth from it, and it's always fascinated our painters, and none more than Thomas Gainsborough.
Gainsborough was born in Sudbury, Suffolk, England. He was the youngest son of John Gainsborough, a weaver and maker of woolen goods. At the age of 13, he impressed his father with his penciling skills, so that he let him go to London to study art in 1740. In London, he first trained under engraver Herbert Gravelotte, but eventually became associated with William Hogarth and his school. One of his mentors was Francis Hayman. In those years, he contributed to the decoration of that is now the Thomas Coram Foundation for Children and the super boxes at Vauxhall Garden. In the 1740s, Gainsborough married Margaret Burr, an illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Beaufort, who settled at £200 annuity on the couple. The artist's work, then mainly composed of landscape paintings, was not selling very well. He returned to Sudbury in 1748-1749 and concentrated on the painting of portraits. In 1752, he and his family, now including 2 daughters, moved to Ipswich. Gainsborough was noted for the speed with which he applied his paint, and he worked more from his observation of nature and of human nature than from any application of formal academic rules. The poetic sensibility of his painting caused Constable to say, "On looking at them, we find tears in our eyes, and know not what brings them." He himself said, "I am sick of portraits, and wish very much to take my Viola da Gama and walk off to some sweet village where I can paint landscapes and enjoy the fact and of life in quietness and ease." His most famous work, such as Portrait of Mrs. Graham, Mary and Margaret, The Painter's Daughters, William Howlett and his wife Elizabeth, Miss Tappan, known as The Morning Walk, and Cottage Girl with Dog and Pitcher, displays the unique individuality of his subjects.
This is one of the great comic masterpieces. I don't want to accuse Gainsborough of being a manipulator, but here he got to do exactly what he wanted, which was to paint landscape and not concentrate on portraits. And he did this by cunningly persuading young Mr. and Mrs. Andrews that for their wedding picture they really wanted it painted out of doors to show people the extent of their property. So he gets to paint the great golden sweep of Suffolk. And overhead, a summer sky with darkening clouds. And here he's really being very naughty, because if ever a marriage suggested darkening clouds, storms ahead, this one did. He's really looked at these two. He's seen that Robert has gone out shooting with his silk stockings, notice all wrinkled at the ankle, and his silk coat and his fancy hat, and he still looks so uninteresting as a person. His clothes don't cohere. He's a yobbo. He'll make anything look shabby. And he's got that great, thick, unintelligent face. I'm so glad that Gainsborough painted the dog, who clearly loves him. Because one does feel he's not going to get a lot of love from Frances Mary. That thin, tense, scraggy little figure with her nasty little pointed shoes, sitting there on that ludicrously elaborate garden bench, staring suspiciously out at us. It's not a marriage made in heaven. And I feel definitely Gainsborough is being naughty when he paints right here in the front the corn sheaves of fertility. Because can you imagine these two talking to one another, let alone going further? And yet one's interested. And that's always the mark of a great portrait. While France was still reeling from the bloodbath of the Revolution, rural Britain stuck to its traditional course. This idyllic world, too, was doomed but it was captured just in time by Britain's best-loved painter, Constable.
John Constable was an English romantic painter. Born in Suffolk, he is known principally for his landscape paintings of Dedham Vale, the area surrounding his home, now known as Constable Country, which he invested with an intensity of affection. "I should paint my own places best," he wrote to his friend John Fisher in 1821. Painting is but another word for feeling. His most famous paintings include Dedham Vale of 1802 and The Hay Wain of 1821. Although his paintings are now among the most popular and valuable in British art, he was never financially successful and did not become a member of the establishment until he was elected to the Royal Academy at the age of 52. He sold more paintings in France than in his native England.
He was a miller's son, brought up here at Flatford. And the thing about him is that he could only paint what he loved, and what he'd loved for a long time. It was the countryside of home, the unexciting fields and streams where he'd lived as a youth, that drew from him those magically simple and yet complicated landscapes. And here's where he painted his best-loved work, The Hay Wain. For so many people, this is their favorite painting. And I think if you were to ask them why, they might say that this reminds them of what we've lost, the innocent countryside, when the waters were crystal clear and there was only the sound of dogs and birds, and that great drowsy peace lying over everything. It's gone, and we long for it. And strangely enough, Constable felt the same in a different way. When he painted this, he was a married man living in London with heavy responsibilities. He hadn't changed in his love. The country hadn't changed in its beauty, but he'd changed from being a carefree boy to being a man. And again, he felt tears coming to his eyes when he looked at the familiar, beloved land. and knew in one sense he'd lost the secure happiness of his boyhood there. But I think it's more than just a longing for what's lost. Because remember, he loved this in the strictest sense. He felt a passion for this country. And whenever there's a passion, there's a sort of erotic charge, there's a thrill to it. And you feel that here, that deep, passionate love. Forever, that Haywain will move empty into that glorious heavenly meadow where the hay will always be waiting to fill the wagon. So there's emptiness and there's completion. There's longing and a sense that if you love something deeply enough, it's never lost. But the Industrial Revolution, with its machinery and steam and power, was changing the face of England. One artist loved the new forces, Turner.
Joseph Turner was an English romantic landscape painter, watercolorist and printmaker. Turner was considered a controversial figure in his day, but is now regarded as the artist who elevated landscape painting to an eminence rivaling history painting. Although renowned for his oil paintings, Turner is also one of the greatest masters of British watercolor landscape painting. He is commonly known as the painter of light, and his work regarded as a romantic preface to Impressionism. Turner was born in Maiden Lane, Covent Garden, London, England. His father, William Turner, was a barber and wig maker. His mother, Mary Marshall, became increasingly mentally unstable, possibly due in part to the early death of Turner's younger sister. He entered the Royal Academy of Art Schools in 1789, when he was only 14 years old, and was accepted into the Academy a year later. His early works, such as Tintern Abbey, stayed true to the traditions of English landscape. However, in Hannibal Crossing the Alps, an emphasis on the destructive power of nature had already come into play. His distinctive style of painting, in which he used watercolor technique with oil paints, created lightness, fluency, and ephemeral atmospheric effects. In his later years, he used oils ever more transparently and turned to the evocation of almost pure light by use of shimmering color. A prime example of his mature style can be seen in Rain, Steam and Speed, the Great Western Railway, where the objects are barely recognizable. The intensity of hue and interest is evanescent light not only placed Turner's work in the vanguard of English painting.
Turner, the new age was one of progress, to be romanticized in a blaze of light. The Fighting Temeraire is one of those splendid, luminous, extravagant, romantic, technicolor, over-the-top paintings that came so natural to Turner. And because they came naturally, they're completely convincing. He was a born romantic. And of course, here he has one of the great romantic themes. The Temeraire had been one of Nelson's ships, one of the heroes of Trafalgar. And now the glory days are over. It's not wanted. And it's being towed away to be broken up. And of course there's the great yellow and gold and red glory of the sky as the sun sinks like a Viking's funeral pyre. Yes, but notice there's another red and gold glory in the picture, and it's coming from the tug, that shapely, bustling little tug. Because although there's all the romance of the past in the Temeraire, the days of fighting and heroism in warfare, there's romance in the tug. The romance of science, of mercantile adventure. It's the latest thing in British technology. And Turner is one of the great affirmers of life. He doesn't know how to lament. He loves the past, but he also loves the present. And his brave, clever little tug bustles with immense confidence into the future.